Well, Obama is filling out the promise he made of getting re-engaged in the Asia-Pacific region. And it's also a year of anniversaries and activities. One of the most important things he's taking part in is the G20, which is a follow-on to the meeting here in Pittsburgh this summer, and then Toronto, where Obama and the others are trying to deal with the aftermath of the recession, rebalance global economics, and that's probably the most important event on his trip. But he'll start with 4 days in India. The Obama administration has tried to pick up from the strong points of the Bush administration preceding them on having a good relationship with a rising India. The idea in the minds of some is to have a kind of counterweight or balance of power for China. In the eyes of others, it's just an opportunity for the U.S. and India to have good relations with each other, irrespective of what's going on with China. I lean toward the latter camp. There's some commercial opportunities which he'll push for, try to get some nuclear power plants sold, maybe, maybe not. Try to sell some jet fighters, more likely not than yes, and sell some other kinds of aircraft for the Indian Armed Forces for long-distance hauling cargo aircraft. 4 days, lots of panoply, lots of pictures to send back to the public in the aftermath of the tough American election that precedes his travel. Then he'll go to Indonesia. He missed 2 trips to Indonesia because of the domestic agenda in the U.S. First the health care bill and then the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And he will only spend 22 hours in Indonesia. He's basically making up for his lost visits. And he promises to go back next year because Indonesia will be the chair of the ASEAN 10 Southeast Asian nations and will be hosting another event. It's about Thanksgiving time next year, and he'll come back with his children in tow so they can see where he lived as a young person. So the trip is kind of truncated. It's an attempt in Indonesia to press forward on the so-called partnership between the two countries, and that it's not called a strategic partnership, but it's still meant to be of the nature of a strategic partnership with counterterrorism and cooperation between our militaries and the like. Then he goes to Japan and Korea. We already talked about the G20. In Japan, it's the 50th anniversary of the U.S.-Japan Mutual Security Treaty, a very important anniversary. And it's also where Japan will be hosting the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, Leaders Forum in Yokohama. And so Obama will be participating in that. They're trying to get a re-energization of trade policy in the region, but we're a long way from scoring any gains at this meeting on that subject. India is an area where I think there's a little bit more boosterism and optimism about the future of U.S.-Indian relations than perhaps is warranted. I think we can have a very good substantive and political and economic relationship with India, but there are people who have expectations. India will do a lot for us to take care of China, and I think India will take care of India. It's not going to take care of China for us. But that being the case, it's still important to continue the diplomacy that started with Bill Clinton's visit, I think it was 1997 or 98 to India, and then subsequently Bush's big visit there, and return visits by Prime Minister Singh here, including last fall to Washington, which was a big affair. And so the president will start off with a really substantial visit there. And I imagine the journalism will be all about how we're putting India right up there on the front line to hold back China, and the business community will be pushing for their opportunities there. India is still a very mixed market. You can make a lot of money there, but it's not easy to get in. And there's a kind of a rage of a bureaucracy that strangles certain kinds of industries. And there's some other industries that have been pretty well exploited, like the backroom and services industries, the outsourcing. And Obama's visit there reflects the significance of that economic relationship as it's grown. Well, the president's going back to Indonesia as a kind of a homecoming. He spent a few years there as a kid. He went to school there. They had hoped to take him to his old school, but it's down a narrow alleyway, and presidential motorcades don't do well on narrow alleyways. He will speak to students in the university in Jakarta about his experiences and the promise of the new partnership between the United States and Indonesia. And I think he'll also pick up some of his themes of messages to the Islamic world. Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim majority country, although it's not an Islamic state. And the population there has both, and the authorities there have both dealt with terrorism more effectively than any other country in the world through the ordinary police and judicial processes, and at the same time have had a very tolerant Islamic life for their people. And so it's kind of a model along with Turkey as it used to be, as a way of modernization accompanying Islam. And so I think he'll be addressing that in his remarks as well. And hopefully he'll have more time when he goes back with his family next year to reminisce about the old days, because he's going to be easily the most popular president ever to set foot on Indonesian soil, and that's an asset the U.S. should take advantage of, because Indonesia is a very important country. Indonesia is almost 300 million people spread across thousands of islands. If Indonesia were in the heart of Europe physically, you would never talk about Germany. It would be so much bigger. But because it's far away and on the south coast of Asia, it's not so big in our minds, but it should be much larger. And I hope this trip, and then even more so the next trip, will give ordinary people in America a better sense of the importance of Indonesia. Well, they're setting it up for a late January visit by Hu Jintao to the United States. He's going to have a state visit to the U.S. It'll be more of a bells and whistles state visit than Hu's previous visit under President Bush, where Bush wanted to play down the relationship with China. The U.S. has still the same agenda with China, but some things have been added to it. The same agenda is global refinancing, our economies, getting things started up again, and putting the U.S. and China trade balance into a better position. The second one is dealing with global climate change, and there's not much happening there right now. At Cancun, it looks like it's not going to be much of a meeting. The third big item on the agenda is non-proliferation, North Korea and Iran. Follow up on what China's doing about Iran, encourage the Chinese to put more pressure on North Korea. The Chinese will want us to get back into the six-party talks with North Korea. We'll dance around that subject in the course of this meeting. And then we've got these new issues that have emerged of China's pushiness in its behavior in the South China Sea with the Japanese in the Senkaku Islands, and outside the Korean Chinese border areas or maritime areas, the Yellow Sea, where the Chinese tell the U.S. not to operate. These are issues that the leaders need to talk about. Well, G20 needs to get down to the business of rebalancing economies. The big surplus generating economies like Japan, Germany, and China need to reduce their surpluses, and the big deficit countries like the U.S. and the UK and some others need to reduce their spending and save more or tax more. And of course, the U.S. doesn't want to tax, at least Congress so far doesn't want to put taxes up. And Americans are still spending at record rates. China doesn't want to give up its exports, so it's going to try to figure out a way to reduce the appearance of the surplus. The target that's been set by finance ministers is 4%. Neither deficit nor surplus countries would exceed 4% of their GDP. China was up to 6% a couple of years ago, which is an enormous amount in world trade. Germany is presently at 6% and shows no real desire to reduce it. So that was supposed to be the topic. The G20 has been sort of sidetracked, because when you're trying to get other people to make sacrifices in their spending or their saving, you have to motivate them. And to get them motivated, the U.S. is using the H-bomb of international finance, which is quantitative easing, where pouring dollars into the market by buying up U.S. bonds, printing cash out of the Federal Reserve. This has put tremendous pressure on the developing world, the emerging market world. They're known as EM, emerging market. These guys are seeing people borrowing money cheap in the U.S. market and then moving it to the fast-growing markets. And that's driving up their currencies. And when the currencies go up, their ability to market Argentine wine or Chilean, whatever, these things all get affected by the rebalancing in the economy caused by quantitative easing. It's America's way of saying, pay attention, we want you to start buying more of our stuff. And we're going to cheapen our currency to make us more competitive in the international market. And if we'll keep doing this until you, in Germany, Japan, China, and other surplus countries, start buying more product and reducing your savings. And that's where we're at. It may be that they'll come up with something at the G20 meeting that papers over the differences among the leaders. My guess is that a lot of this will be false promises. In China's case, for example, if China wants to go from a 6% to a 4 or 3% share of GDP, it can do it by buying more stuff overseas, like commodities. They can buy and stockpile oil and coal, copper, aluminum, all these things. And that goes into Chinese exports and production. It doesn't go into the pockets of Chinese consumers. And it'll emerge back into the international market as a bigger share of GDP. And of course, the Chinese GDP is growing so rapidly that 4% is still a larger and larger number every year as a trade figure. And so China can fairly comfortably make that kind of promise, and it will not get the result that we want to see out of China. The U.S. is on the rebound in Asia. The U.S. started to get weak in Asia in 1997 when the financial crisis occurred, and a lot of the eyes of the American business community were diverted from the star attraction of the early 1990s, Southeast Asia, to the rising opportunities in China as China prepared to join the World Trade Organization in 2002. And that's people seized on the Chinese opportunities to invest and get trade in that market, to export from the Chinese industrial platform. And so now we then had the 2001 9/11, the distraction of the counterterror effort, and the Bush administration really kind of didn't pay a lot of attention to Southeast Asia except for the tsunami in Indonesia in 2004-05 and the Burmese cyclone at the end of the Bush administration. They missed a lot of meetings, seemed not to care. And precisely at the same time, China was really investing in the Southeast Asian region, both in diplomacy and economic terms. And so the U.S. is now, under the Obama administration, trying to fill in the gap there. We'd like to have stronger relations with Japan. That we've had trouble because there's a tremendous change going on in Japanese domestic politics. But as I mentioned, the Chinese pushiness in the maritime regions along its periphery have helped to solidify U.S.-Japanese, U.S.-Korean alliance relations and strengthen U.S. relations with the rest of the region, notably Vietnam and the rest of Southeast Asia. So it's a time when the U.S. is sort of on the rebound from that period of inattention or less attention to one where we see opportunities to forge a coalition of countries that can provide a kind of balance to Chinese power. Sometimes the U.S. does this a bit clumsily. We're not the world's best diplomats as a people anyway. But on the whole, the pattern of the administration strategy is pretty good.